Disclaimer: I made this essay after reading a tweet about Gameloft. Gameloft is one of the golden goose in video game industry. Their golden age begins from 2000 to 2010s. The studio specialized in creating video games and released them to mobile phone, specifically as a Java games and early days of smartphone. Despite the limitation of Java games, Gameloft is able to provide groundbreaking games in the palm of your hands. The internet back then was still very much Wild West. Having an access to it was a luxury in itself. Mobile data and Wi-Fi in the 2000s were hard to come by, especially if you live in Southeast Asia. Only with a lot of money you could afford it. Although there was another way you could get the game: Bluetooth.
The Bluetooth device is ready to pair.
People usually got their games through Bluetooth transfer. It took a long time but required no internet connections. Games back then had file size under 10 megabytes, so you still have plenty of storage left in your trusty 100 megabyte memory card. I remember finding Java games on WebTrick and transferring them over my Nokia phone. To name a few, Gangster Crime City, Asphalt Urban GT, and Modern Combat 2 Black Pegasus are games that I vividly remembered. I used to play them during road trips. Why? Because I don't want to bring my whole PC setup every time I had to go to somewhere. A CRT monitor alone could fill my trunk about 40%. Well, anyways, all the games I mentioned were created by Gameloft. They are still doing pretty okay to this day, hopefully. Their massive success pushed them to expand their studios from Europe into Southeast Asia. This expansion began in 2004 when they opened their first Vietnamese branch Saigon studio in Ho Chi Minh City. In 2010, Gameloft Indonesia was established in Yogyakarta. Then in 2011, they expanded further in Vietnam with opening of Hanoi studio located in, as the name suggests, Hanoi. Unfortunately, Gameloft was acquired by Vivendi in 2016. Around the same time, the mobile market in the 2010s were becoming saturated, and Gameloft felt the pressure. Additionally, strong competition and widespread layoffs were clear signs that Gameloft was starting to fall behind. Golden Age Gameloft is truly unstoppable. They had found a formula to pump out mobile games and push them onto every platform available. With the support of their Vietnam and Indonesia branches, they also helped to drive the local game industry in both countries forward. However, both branches face their own challenges. Like in Vietnam, for example, they have still at the time negative sentiment about video games, and in Indonesia about a false raid happening in the studio. So speaking of which, how did that raid even happen in the first place? Was it just a fluke, or did the authorities have something shadier going on behind the scenes? So the case itself began when the authorities launched an intense search for illegal gambling operations in the area. They went door to door to determine to verify whenever the claims circulating were true or false. The operation took a fatal turn when an anonymous resident tipped off the authorities about suspicious activities happening inside Gameloft Studios, claiming that the office was being used as a gambling den. We do not know for sure whether this tip came from a real person or if the authorities simply had too much time on their hands. What makes it so suspicious is that, according to one news outlet covering the case, the authorities referred to the office as a game center. Maybe it's a call sign for a gambling den, but who knows? The raid was later confirmed and executed on November 10, 2014 at 12. Within an hour, the authorities arrived at Gameloft Indonesia and began raiding the place. Initially, a single person in plain clothes attempted to enter the building, but was immediately turned away by the security. What's the reason? Well, only staff were allowed to inside. Then, the person kept insisting to get inside, but the security stood their ground, making it clear that only authorized personnel could enter. Soon after, 10 people in brownish uniforms, looking like politicians, showed up and demanded the door to be opened. And of course, the security were very adamant because number one, it was strange to see a group of people so adamant to get inside. Number two, they had no permits or search warrant to carry out the raid. And much like typical behaviors of the police in Indonesia, the security was eventually knocked out and the group forced their way into the office. Again, stuff like this should not be normalized. If the sole purpose of your visit to investigate, there is no reason to start a fight or resort into unethical terms just to prove your point. But again, this is a country that has been publicly leaked its own citizen data due to government incompetence, so perhaps none of this should come as a surprise. From there, police began to combing out the office floor by floor, interrogating staff members in an attempt to validate their claims. What made this even more concerning was that in 2010 and 2014, most Indonesians had little to no understanding of what game development actually looked like. That alone can be fatal for the whole case being a huge misunderstanding. According to the conversation with an undisclosed staff member and the individual involved,
maksudnya hadiah apa Pak? Kalian orang sebanyak ini main game, masa nggak ada orang yang dapat hadiah? Pak, kan ini kantor, ya bayarnya gaji per bulan, ditambah beberapa insentif lain ke, asuransi kesehatan, jam sostek, atau bonus lah. Tapi kan di game center lain ada, yang orangnya nggak sebanyak ini ada hadiah, dan lombanya mas. Masa di sini nggak ada sama sekali, terus kalian dapat apa?
the staff could tell that the person they were speaking was not quite connecting the dots, so the staff answered,
Jadi gini Pak, pertama kami itu adalah kantor, bukan warnet atau game center. Kedua, kami di sini statusnya pegawai ya. Jadi Bapak pisahin dulu nih, status kami adalah kantor dan bukan warnet atau game center.
People with these clothes tend to carry a high ego and short temper. Rather than accepting what the staff had clearly explained, they wanted to validate themselves and prove that they were on the right track. So they pushed further, moving up to the next floor, in hopes of finding something that could justify the whole operation. According to the multiple local media outlets, the staff were not afraid of the authorities at all. What they were actually afraid was their deadlines. So that is relatable. So when the authorities made it up to the third floor, the entire staff greeted them with a thunderous applause. Amazing. For anyone with an ego, that kind of reception would be shattering, and that is exactly what happened to them. The officers snapped, yelling at the staff and demanding to know why they were clapping. They were not clapping to celebrate the authorities' hard work. They were clapping for their sheer stupidity of the whole ordeal. Again, no amount of reason can get through to you if you have a fragile ego. It took hours of raiding and the entire office before they finally accepted that there was nothing to find. No evidence, no gambling den, just they left empty-handed. Just 2 hours after the raid, staff members took to social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter to share their experience. Some expressed that they were felt genuinely traumatized, of course, by what had happened, while others on the internet were less sympathetic towards the authorities, calling out how absurd it was that they could not tell the difference between a gambling den and a game studio. The story spread quickly and caught enough attention to prompt the director of Gameloft Indonesia, Andrei Vladimir Lescu, to file a formal complaint to the mayor of Yogyakarta and the city police chief of Yogyakarta, demanding an explanation. Andrei stated,
These actions can be futile as an aggressive pressure to stir off investors. We do not develop a game for gamblings. I understand that this is just a misunderstanding, which I forgave them. They just want to check things inside the studio to see if it is within legal jurisdiction.
Not long after the case went viral, Indonesian media outlet Kompas.com reached out to the Yogyakarta police chief for comment. In a rather dumb move, they denied that any raid had taken place. At the same time, they also acknowledge that they have simply carried out their duty to investigate a citizen's concern about the office being used as a gambling site. You cannot deny something and justify it at the same time. It's like saying, hey, we did not do that stuff, but we had to find out what that stuff actually is. So I'm starting to wonder who this citizen really is, or are they really exist in the first place? Also, remember that the statement that I just said before? Well, that did not last long because Wirobrajan Police Chief Commissioner Aryuniwati confirmed that the raid did in fact take place, and they found absolutely no evidence of the place being used as a gambling site. To quote,
"Langkah ini sebenarnya kami lakukan sebagai bentuk antisipasi. Setelah mendapat penjelasan dari penanggung jawab perusahaan, polisi langsung pulang."
On November 11, 2014, Andre arranged a meeting with the mayor of Yogyakarta, Hayardi Suyuti, along with several officials for a studio tour. Andre personally guided both the mayor and officials through its room, describing its purpose so they could get a clear picture of what actually goes inside the studio. As I mentioned earlier, there is some sensitive information within any game studio that should remain strictly internal. We do not know any specific details of what was shared during the tour, but it is safe to assume that Andre was only describing the general purpose of each room rather than giving away confidentials. At the end of the room tour, both mayors and officials pleased and happy, I guess, that the studio was exactly what it claimed to be, a game development studio. The whole raid feels so weird when you realize Gameloft had a good relationship with the government, but it all shattered after big misunderstanding. Again, we don't know if this is the effect of memory loss or are they collaborating with different government instead. So, who actually tipped off the authorities about the studio in the first place? Well, we don't know for sure because the whole case feels off from the start. How did the police even receive that report? Remember, this was in 2014 and according to various media outlets, violent street crimes were rampant at the time, yet the authorities did not seem too eager to act on those. But a game studio allegedly being used as a gambling den? I guess they were prioritized more on that. What's strange is that there was one media outlet seemingly took the authorities' side, alleging that because Gameloft had implemented microtransaction in their games, it was automatically qualified as gambling. Oh, that's weird. But ironically, that article was deleted. Thankfully, someone had the sense to archive it in internet forums. The strangest of all for me is the reports, because Gameloft Indonesia had been operating since 2010, and by 2014, they were nearly 4 years into running the studio. At that point, people in the surrounding area should have had some ideas of what the place actually was. But again, many people in 2010 doesn't understand what the concept of game development is. So it's reasonable, not really though, that someone could confuse the office as a gambling den. That concludes with two possibilities. Either the police were deliberately dishonest, which is not in very rare occasion, or they were genuinely misunderstood what they were walking into. The use of the term game center by one of the officers could hint that it was literally a game center or a gambling den. On another note, this one is most critical to me because one of the studio's human resource managers said that the daughter of the royal family, Princess Hayu, was previously worked at Gameloft as HD game producer. So the whole situation's become more absurd if you think about it. Like, if you're going to allege that the place is a gambling den, you are essentially saying that a member of royal family worked in one. So that is not just a misunderstanding. There is an assumption could land serious trouble for them with the royal family. The effect of the raid itself was both devastating and deeply embarrassing for the government. One anonymous source who worked in the city's investment sector stated that Gameloft had played a significant role in convincing top investors to put their money in Yogyakarta. To make the matters worse, even some higher-ups within the government were furious at the authorities over the incidents. What made it even more tone-deaf was the authorities' smug remark that the city doesn't need any more investors. On top of that, the assault on the studio's security did not go unnoticed by the public either. It was clear a sign of power abuse and only added more fuel to the outrage. If the social media was as powerful back then as it is today, the case would have gone viral. The authorities' heavy-handed approach could have had devastating consequences for the video game industry in Indonesia as a whole. And this was not the first isolated incident happens. It has happened multiple times around 2010s. On the other side, people were slowly starting to realize what the video games really meant. It's not just a hobby. You can make something out of that hobby into a game, or I guess game development.